Hey guys, Lonewolf here. And so since well before I started making YouTube videos, people have asked me questions along the lines of, how do I get better at this game? How do I improve my KD, my score, my aim, whatever? I've had this in COD, Battlefield, and even Counter-Strike from time to time. And mostly, as you might imagine, there's no easy answer to this. You can't give one tip that's going to suddenly make someone a much better player. But when people say things like, I just don't feel like I'm doing anywhere near as well as I should do, the first thing I always ask is, well, what's your setup like? What are your system specifications? What kind of frame rate are you getting? What are your graphic settings in game? Because a lot of the time, it does actually come down to the fact that their setup is hindering their performance in game. I've seen people's performance increase dramatically and often had feedback along the lines of, hey, this game's so much easier to play, or I'm so much more effective now. So whilst this might be hard for some of you to believe, I do really think there's a large group of people out there who want to play games, they want to play them on PC, it's a platform with a rapidly growing user base, and yet they don't have the experience or perhaps the interest or time to know that something about their system is really holding them back. I was fairly apprehensive about making this video, firstly because it's quite a departure from the sort of topic I would usually discuss, also because unfortunately whenever PC gamers discuss hardware or graphic detail or frame rate, there's often a perception that it's going to be a PC elitist lecturing everyone on where they should spend their money and how great their platform is, and that's really not what I want to do here at all. I was also a little bit concerned that this video wouldn't be particularly useful for my console audience. I would recommend you stick around if you play on console because hopefully this will be interesting, but it's not going to directly benefit you because this isn't a problem that affects consoles. Every console delivers a unified experience where everyone gets the same thing. This isn't the case on PC. So what I really want to address is, what is the minimum your PC needs to deliver upon in order for you to be competitive with the vast majority of other players? Going into this, I knew it would be difficult to remain unbiased, but I have tried as hard as possible to remain objective. Obviously, you're used to a particular setup and any perceivable change from this is probably going to make you feel quite prejudiced, but I have tried to remain objective. I'm also going to bring my friend Jester in towards the end of this video just so you can hear his opinion as well as mine. Whilst by and large we do agree, we are approaching this from slightly different perspectives, and I think it's useful to have two corroborating accounts. We played around with different frame rate caps, resolutions, and video detail settings, and we're going to try and answer to what degree each of those is important in terms of keeping you competitive. We did all of our testing on Zavod311 because I feel like of all the maps in the game, this one's got a lot going on. There's a lot of foliage, a lot of objects, plenty of places for people to hide, and if any map's going to make it difficult for you to see people because of poor visuals, then it's going to be one like this. The first thing we tried was lowering the resolution. We lowered it from 1920 by 1080, that's 1080p, which is native resolution for both our monitors, all the way down to 720p, which is 1280 by 720. By and large, this was okay. Medium range, this was fine. So within the effective range of an assault rifle, I don't think this is going to put you at a disadvantage. However, beyond that range, beyond about 100 meters, this was a problem for both of us. If you're using a sniper rifle, for me personally, I like to identify a target with a full field of view, so not scoped in, and then I like to scope in and shoot them. I feel like this is the safest way to play a long-range weapon. Likewise, if you're using a DMR, or if you're just using an assault rifle and need to be able to see someone at long range before you advance. This resolution would make that quite difficult. It would make it quite difficult for you to see people at distance. So in this respect, you are at a bit of a disadvantage, but it still wasn't major compared with the stuff I'm going to talk about in a moment. The next thing we did was to lower the detail preset whilst keeping the resolution at 1280 by 720 from ultra to high, then to medium, then to low. By and large, this was still kind of okay. At low, it was pretty problematic for moving targets because without any anti-aliasing and with a very low resolution, you get a lot of jagged edges that when you move also appear to move around the screen. So spotting an enemy that's walking in amongst that is quite challenging, especially at longer ranges. At close range, it wouldn't be a huge problem, but I do feel like at that point, you're putting yourself at a bit of a disadvantage, especially in that medium to long range. Having done this, we thought we'd just quickly try lowering the resolution scale because we figured that for people who needed to be able to get more frames per second, they might want to try this. It really wasn't worthwhile. We didn't see any real increase to our frame rate doing this, and at the same time, the level we had to drop it to make any difference just made it almost impossible to see anything. So I don't recommend you touch the resolution scale, just leave it at 100% unless of course you want to boost it up for super sampling, but that's an entirely different thing. So having tried turning everything down like this, we then tried turning the resolution up and keeping the details low. Obviously, if you keep the details low like this is easier on your GPU, and we wanted to see whether it's better to trade off details or resolution. And I can say with 100% certainty that you are better to keep your resolution high and turn your details down. At least in Battlefield 4, this was so much easier. I could play at 1080p, but with the details on low quite happily. I really wouldn't feel like I'm at any disadvantage compared with how I normally play. This was by far the better option, and if you have to trade one for the other, trade off the details. The only reason you ever want to lower your resolution or affect detail is to get a higher frame rate, which transitions very nicely into the second part of this testing, which was trying to establish exactly what is an acceptable frame rate to play Battlefield 4 on PC. Considering that so many people are running 60 or 120 or 200 frames per second, at what point are you able to compete with these people? At what point are you able to keep pace and not be at a disadvantage? I think now would be a good time to bring Jester into this discussion, just so you can hear both of our perspectives at the same time. Whilst I think by and large we agree on where the competitive threshold lies, in terms of comfort, we definitely have a very different perspective on this. One of the biggest differences between our configurations is that although we have pretty similar graphics gaming horsepower, he uses a 144Hz monitor and I use a 60Hz panel. So when we capped it at 60 frames per second, which was the first thing we did, I didn't have too much difficulty with this. Although I usually run a much higher frame rate, that is generally just to eliminate tearing and to make the engine feel ever so slightly smoother. For you, on the other hand, I think you said this made you feel quite sick. Is that about right?
Yeah, it's definitely laggy. I just couldn't get used to the 60 FPS, and just from playing at 120, it's definitely noticeable, and I definitely didn't enjoy it.
Yeah, and I think this does make sense. I think this is kind of to be expected because those 120 and 144Hz monitors are marketed as making the game feel smoother. But do you think it actually would have prevented you in the long run from doing as well as you do in game?
No, I wouldn't say so. I definitely get used to it over, a couple of days, but I just felt sick from it. My aim was fine, but I definitely didn't feel like I was at a major disadvantage while using 60 FPS.
Right. Now what we did next was to drop the frame rate down to 30 and even 24 frames per second, and I personally found this incredibly uncomfortable. It made it very difficult for me to aim, it made it very difficult for me to precisely jump between objects, should you ever need to do that. It just made the whole experience feel distinctly laggy. For you, I think you found this pretty much unplayable, right?
Yeah, I definitely felt like it hindered my performance quite a bit. I do feel like 30 FPS is good for, racing games or games that you just, casually play now and again.
So single player games as well.
Yeah. So, but the main difference really is that this is an FPS. Battlefield is definitely, all about that twitch shooting and, having the advantage over your enemy at all times. And I do feel like you are hindered slightly when you're playing at low frame rates against other people who are at like 120 frames. Just because they can see more frames than you, and I do feel like that is a bit of a bad thing.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, again, I've said this before, but I think by and large, your biggest advantage is going to come from good game sense and positioning yourself well. Yeah. But you can't really avoid the fact that there are situations in which the speed with which you react to a threat is going to have an impact on your success. And I certainly felt that at 30 frames per second, when I'm competing against people who are seeing so much more information on screen and where it's much easier for them to, say, compensate for recoil or to fine-tune their aim, this would put you at a disadvantage. So I just don't feel like 30 is really an acceptable minimum for PC gaming. Now, again, on console, I think this is a very different situation because on console, first of all, the speed with which things happen is slowed down a little bit. I know people can get very good at aiming with joysticks, but there is no denying that the mouse and keyboard is more precise, and when you're dealing with people who have very high refresh rate monitors and very high frame rates, very fluid experience, they're going to shoot you incredibly quickly, and you need to be able to compete with that, and I just don't feel like you can do that at 30 frames per second. Would you say that's about right?
Yeah, that's about right. I just don't think you're able to aim as well as you would at 60 FPS.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So I think that would constitute a competitive disadvantage at that point. Now, we tried 40 frames per second next, and this was definitely better, wasn't it? We could feel that. But I still don't feel like this would really take you to a point where it's okay. I think 40 frames per second is still too low. We then took it to 45. That still felt too low, but 50. I thought 50 was pretty much okay. What about you?
Yeah, I felt like that was the minimum at which, you know, you could start seeing a competitive level of gameplay. I mean, it's not, you know, brilliant at, you know, above
No,
60,
it's not brilliant, but I think you could definitely say that somebody at 50 frames per second could become a very good player, couldn't they?
Yeah, they could.
And I don't think you would be able
to.
to. I don't think that would be a huge problem. Now, this is kind of what I was expecting, because of the people I know, I've never known anyone run 30 frames per second on a PC first-person shooter and do better than I do. Now, this is not me bragging or anything. I've just never seen it happen. I don't know about you. Have you ever known anyone?
No, definitely not. I feel like I'm at an advantage a lot of the time against some of these low frame rate, you know, players, and
I think so too. And I mean, we're not trying to sound like arses here. That's not where we're coming at this from. We're just trying to make sure that everyone is on a more or less level playing field, because it's fair enough to pay for better visuals. That's okay.
Yeah.
What this video is aiming to do is just trying to educate people as to below which point you're actually going to be at a competitive disadvantage, and that is something you need to work on, either by changing your configuration or potentially spending more money. I'm not going to talk too much about that, because I certainly don't want to be telling people what they should or shouldn't buy. So thank you very much to Jester for helping me out with this, for giving his input and taking part in the testing. You guys should also let me know in the comments below exactly what you feel is that minimum threshold if you play on PC. If you play on console, I apologize for this video not being particularly applicable for you, but hopefully it was interesting just to see the woes of playing on PC as much as anything else, because there is that potential for the platform to be quite unfair, inherently so. The last thing I want to talk about is just peripherals. Mostly, I think that you're getting into luxury items when you talk about things like mechanical keyboards. Some people are going to advocate these and say you just can't possibly live without one. I'm going to say from my own personal experience that moving to a mechanical keyboard did make me feel more comfortable. I do really like it, but I don't feel like I've improved in game for having got one. Your mouse, on the other hand, definitely this is something you need to look at. A basic laser mouse, the kind of thing you might find in an office, just isn't really up to gaming. It doesn't allow you the kind of granular control you're going to want when you try and fine-tune your sensitivity, and I often find they have some pretty nasty acceleration in places they're not 100% reliable. You're just better off spending a little bit of money and getting a cheap gaming grade mouse, and that's going to make the most difference as far as buying your peripherals. So that pretty much concludes all I want to say about this. I know for some of you this is purely an academic exercise and your system is more than capable of dealing with anything you throw at it, and for you this perhaps isn't very useful, also for console players, so for a lot of you this is purely for interest's sake, but I hope this has helped some people. I also hope I haven't managed to offend anyone in the process. I know this is one of those topics where people are very easily offended and there's a whole load of prejudice and bad feeling around this issue, but I don't feel like it needs to be that way, and hopefully I've managed to navigate it without upsetting anyone too much. So let me know what you thought of this video, like and subscribe if you enjoyed, leave a comment, try not to be too harsh to Jester because I thought he did pretty well and I kind of sprung this on him so he didn't really have any time to prepare. Thank you very much for watching and I'll see you next time. Can you fly like that?
No, dude, am I going down?
You're spiraling.
Oh crap!
Hello. Okay, if the human eye can only see this, we have really pathetic eyes.